This is Lauren Schaller, and I'm presenting Inquiring Minds Want to Know, Inquiry-Based Learning in Science Inclusion Classes. This was my study done for an Inquiry for Teaching and Learning class in December 2020. I am going to be talking very fast, so feel free to pause the video if you need to, or rewatch if you need to watch it again. So a little bit about me. I am a teacher at Dauphin County Technical School, which is located in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania, and I've been there for 3 years as a freshman science and environmental science teacher. And I'm currently a graduate student in the Assessment Curriculum and Teaching Program with the STEM endorsement, STEM concentration in the Department of Educational Foundations at Millersville University. So why did I do my study? I was eager to get some deeper, more meaningful, higher level learning for all of my students because I was not seeing as much of it as I knew they were capable of in the classroom. Why do that? For the purposes of practical abilities, knowledge, academic skill, not only to benefit their education, but their life beyond. So I learned about inquiry-based teaching through my research and through my work in the graduate program. And inquiry-based teaching, in a nutshell, is open-ended, student-driven, student-centered, hands-on activities. It's action-based learning. Students make a lot of decisions, and the more inquiry, the more decisions. It's often contrasted to teacher-based learning where the teacher is at the center of the learning and just delivering everything to the students, and the students are passive. Some say that students who have learning disabilities or individualized education plans, IEPs, are incapable of this. And so I noticed this in my research noted, but also in real life. Some teachers kind of follow this line of thought, and I thought, is that really true? Is there a way to implement inquiry? So I asked myself, what is the effect of different levels of inquiry on student achievement in an inclusion high school science classroom? So just to provide a little background, these are the different levels of inquiry. Not everybody agrees on exactly what the labels are, but this is sort of the gist and what was used for the purpose of the study. When you have no inquiry, the teacher provides the student with the question to investigate, gives the student the procedure, and pre-generates the answer that the student is expected to find. Then when you start with inquiry, structured inquiry is the same thing, except the student generates they generate their own answers, they find their own answers. It wasn't necessarily found out by the teacher in advance. Then in the next step, guided inquiry, the teacher poses the question and the student takes it from there and does their own procedure and investigation. And then in open inquiry, the student is completely guiding their own learning, including posing their own questions at the beginning. And the research that guided me in this endeavor was that inquiry, a lot of people believe, is not only important and effective, but vital to classrooms and the future 21st century workforce skills. As I mentioned before, there's a question as to whether or not students with disabilities can effectively do it. So these are some of the studies that I investigated to see what was done so far. These two studies here were done on structured inquiries. Students with disabilities were included. The top one here was a massive study which found that structured inquiry students outperformed students who were exposed only to teacher-centered learning. However, this study on the bottom showed that inquiry doesn't always work. In these other studies, this one on the top, open inquiry at the high school, it was very successful, but the researchers cautioned that inquiry with students with disabilities can work, but with lots of support and extra time. This one here at the elementary school, students went from structured to guided inquiry and showed significant improvements. And then this last one on the bottom, not no IEP kids or anything like that, but very interesting results where students were divided into experimental groups. Different levels of inquiry, and the most successful group was the one with the medium level of inquiry, the group that had a moderate level, so some inquiry but not the highest. So I found that interesting and designed my study where I had two groups. One I called the experimental group, which received by the end of the 3 weeks more inquiry, a higher level of inquiry than the control group, which still received inquiry but not to the same extent. So the experimental group went from structured to guided to open, and the control group went from no inquiry to structured to guided. And they all did these water pollution experiments, investigations for 3 weeks. Each week, an online assessment was collected from the students, and then for the one in-person day, the 1-hour class they came in, they took a pre-assessment, post-assessment, and they were observed by a passive observer, a non-teacher in the classroom. And that was done through an observation rubric and checklist. These are some pictures of some of the things that the students created this was the last day where they filtered water and achieved some success. So these are some of the themes that I found. When it came to the online assessments, there was a peak in week 2 for both classes. The experimental group is the lime green. I think in every one of these line graphs you're about to see, the lime green is the experimental group, and this kind of aquamarine color is the control group. A little spike here for the experimental group, this was the guided inquiry, but then shot down for the open inquiry. Both groups had a decrease in performance in the post-assessments in their second week, regardless of what level it was. But they bounced back in the third week. Same thing happened in the lab work. This is based on the observation rubric, and pretty consistently, the experimental group had a wide range of scores, whereas the control group was more consistent. So another striking result, both groups experienced growth each week. So this is the percent difference between the pre and post assessments for each week. So you can see that every time all the students learned more and experienced the most growth from pre to post assessment. So this is the same information again, just the experimental group. And even though their highest performance was in the first week, their lowest was in the second week, in the third week at the open inquiry, they bounced back in their scores, and the slope of the line is the steepest in that third week. Same thing happened, but to a greater extent in the control group. And I noticed that the control group consistently outperformed the experimental group. These are the results of the observation checklist according to the different criteria you will see along here at the bottom. The experimental group seemed to dip in a lot of ways in that open inquiry at the end. I noticed that consistently the highest average scores tended to be in the observation results as opposed to the post-assessment and as well as the online assessments. And what level of inquiry had the highest scores? Well, the results were varied across the board. You can see here that the experimental group is in yellow, and the white text is the control group. Both groups had in their remote learning highest in the middle. So for experimental group, their highest scores were in guided and structured and open. There's a tie here for the observational rubric. The control group had its highest scores in structured inquiry, no inquiry, and then 2 for guided inquiry. So again, a little inconsistent, but I like to add to that the growth curve, so that percentage of growth from pre to post, was the highest in the final week for both groups, open for experimental and guided for control. So, what can I conclude? Maybe there are too many variables, a little inconclusive, but there are some things I can say. Inquiry is a gradual process. There seems to be a learning curve to get the hang of it, and that was reflected in the scores. Growth can happen with the gradual exposure. It seemed that the control group did the best. It does need time. You need to nurture inquiry-based learning with the students. I think that the one study that I had found where the level of inquiry was the best in the middle, was consistent with some of my results. It seemed that you have to find just the right amount. It's like the Goldilocks zone. You want just the right amount of inquiry, not too much, but not too little either. I found that some of the results were consistent depending on what week it was, regardless of what level of inquiry it was. So maybe it simply doesn't really matter how much inquiry it is. Maybe it matters more how much time has been spent on inquiry. For the future, I'm going to provide inquiry in smaller doses with simple tasks. And instead of written post-assessments, I'm going to do more verbal and hands-on assessments to match. I'm going to I would also like to say, and I'm running out of time here, that I believe that I noticed more learning happening through an interpersonal exchange with the students as opposed to lecture give and take. The process of learning was changing, and I just want to make sure the assessment matches that. Implications for my school, we should start incorporating, I believe, there is evidence to suggest that inquiry can be included in all classes, depending on the style and the way that it is presented. And these are my references. Thank you.